Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another day of Vlogmas. Today I'm going to be doing my November wrap up and talking about all the books that I read in the month of November. So November was quite an unusual reading month for me. I was participating in Nonfiction November, so a fair chunk of what I read this month was non-fiction. I was also reading one very long classic throughout the month, which I am still not even halfway through, so that took up quite a lot of my reading time. So I did finish off 11 things in the month of November, but some of them were quite short, and I am in the middle of 3 other things, so I will talk about them a little bit today as well, but I'll be carrying them on into December. So I will start off, as always, with the classics. In the month of November, I read 4 of Dickens's Christmas novellas, which I read across these 2 beautiful collections. I read A Christmas Carol, The Haunted Man, The Chimes, and The Battle of Life. I'm not going to say very much about those 4 Christmas novellas because I have literally done a full week of talking about a different Dickens Christmas novella every day, so there are individual reviews of those 4 books which I'm going to link down below, and you can go along and have a watch of. They were all up last week if you missed them as part of my little mini Dickens Christmas author week. But I read those 4 in November in preparation for making that week. So Dickens wrote 5 Christmas novellas, all I think in the 1840s, and they were all published sort of a couple of days before Christmas. Some of them are more Christmassy than the others. A Christmas Carol is my favourite of the Christmas novellas. It is about a man called Scrooge who is visited by 4 ghosts who tell him how to mend his ways and make him a better and nicer man. I love The Christmas Carol a lot. Another one that I really love is The Haunted Man, which is probably my second favourite, and The Haunted Man looks at a man who is kind of haunted by a ghostly, shadowy figure of himself who makes a bargain with him and says that he can forget all the sorrow and misery of his life. At the moment this man, Redlaw, forgets all the trouble and sorrow in his life, he also loses the ability to empathise with other people, and the story kind of follows how that works. The Battle of Life is one of the least Christmassy of Dickens's Christmas novellas, and it tells the story of 2 sisters who are sort of in love with the same man and kind of things that go on from there, and it tells the story of this little family and their kind of relationships and friends over the course of nearly 10 years. The novella takes place in kind of 3 different sections which all take place in different years, one of which is on Christmas Eve, so that's the kind of Christmassy element there. And then I also read The Chimes, which is, as I mentioned last week, my least favourite of Dickens's Christmas novellas. It is a New Year story about a fairly poor man who works nearby a cathedral, and on New Year's Eve he goes to visit the chimes of the cathedral bell at night, and they kind of turn into spirits who show him a vision of the future in order to make him have sort of more hope in life and more hope in humanity, sort of. But like I said, that's my least favourite of Dickens's Christmas novellas. I don't think it's quite as effective. It was published the year after A Christmas Carol, and I feel like Dickens tried to repeat A Christmas Carol and it just isn't quite as good as A Christmas Carol. But regardless, I really enjoyed reading Dickens's 4 Christmas novellas in November in the last week or so of November, and that definitely put me in the mood for Christmas as well. Another classic I spent quite a lot of November reading, though did not finish, is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This edition is a lie. I'm holding this up as a visual aid, but I'm not reading this edition at all, and I'm not even reading this translation. I'm reading a Kindle version because this is very heavy to carry around. I'm also reading a different translation because this edition here translates the French in footnotes rather than in the body of the text, which I found really frustrating to read when I started reading this. So I'm reading a Kindle edition of the Maud translation, which translates the French in the line, which is much better. So I'm doing well with War and Peace. I've got a lot further than the last time I tried to read it last year. I'm 40% the way through, so I definitely will finish it. I don't know whether I will actually manage to finish it before the end of 2018 because, like I said, I've been reading it for a month and I'm only 40% the way through, so I think I'll probably finish it in January. But I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm nearly halfway through. It's really enjoyable and interesting. I'm finding the history, like the historical elements behind it, really interesting, and all the kind of character relationships so fascinating. I'm loving the writing style. I love that Leo Tolstoy writes in really short chapters, because even though his books are really long, it means that you feel like you're making progress and you feel like you're kind of carrying on, and it just makes it really engaging. I'm finding so far that I am loving all the kind of society, social manners chapters, but the chapters at war I'm finding slightly less gripping, so that might be why I've been reading it slightly slower as well, and also just because it's so humongous and I didn't just want to read one book for the entire month. I like to have more variety than that. War and Peace has still probably taken up a good third to half of all the reading I've done in the month of November, but I'm still only 40% the way through. Might manage to finish in December, more likely I won't, and we'll carry it on into January, but I am really enjoying it so far. Then on to some Anthony Powell. I'm still reading his series A Dance to the Music of Time as part of my ongoing read-along. So in November I read The Soldier's Art. I'm slightly behind. This was supposed to be October's book, but I really enjoyed this one. This is another one set in the Second World War, and we follow Nick as usual, and sort of all his doings and all the different people that he meets. And this book is really powerful and really moving, especially in the way it kind of describes the Blitz. There is a full video of this already up, which I will link down below, but I really enjoyed reading this book, as I do with the whole of the series. And then I'm also currently still reading The Military Philosophers, which is the next book in the series. This was November's book. I'm about halfway through, but I haven't quite finished it off yet, so I'll be carrying this on into December. It's another book in the series which is set in the Second World War, and I'll be doing an individual book review of this as well. Basically, for the whole of this series, whenever I talk about them in wrap-ups, there's not too much I can say because they are part of a series, but if you are carrying on in the read-along, do look out for the individual videos because I do put them up pretty regularly, even if sometimes a few weeks late. Then another classic I read was an Agatha Christie. This was And Then There Were None, which is probably my favourite Agatha Christie I've read so far. I absolutely loved it. I read this for the Tenterhooks book club, which is run by Angelica Kofer and Emma from Drinking by My Shelf. I will link their channels down below and also the link to the book club as well, because anyone is welcome to join, and it's really, really great fun. And Then There Were None is a absolutely brilliant Agatha Christie book. I loved it so much. It starts off with these 10 different people all on their way to spend the summer at a particular island. They have been invited by various people, sometimes in slightly mysterious circumstances, and when they get there they find that the hosts and the hostess are missing, and the people who invited them are not there. Instead, there are these 10 people in this house on this island, slightly cut off from everywhere else. They have dinner together, and then after dinner a gramophone starts playing, and this gramophone record is a recording of somebody speaking, and this person speaking accuses all 10 people present of being in some way complicit in the death of another human being, either through sort of active murder or through kind of neglect or careless behaviour. And then after this happens, somebody dies. And things start to go on from there. It's so dramatic and intense and exciting. The atmosphere is incredible. It's so gripping. Like, I read it in less than a day. Yeah, I love Agatha Christie so much. Her characterisation is so great, her writing is so compelling, and she's just brilliant at creating a really good atmosphere. I would highly, highly recommend And Then There Were None. Definitely a favourite read of this month. Moving on to contemporary books. In November I only read one contemporary novel, which is why I say it was a weird reading month for me. That's very, very rare, but I think that's because it was non-fiction November and because I knew I wanted to get through all of the Dickens Christmas stories so that I could do my little Dickens Christmas author week. Also, November was just a really busy, crazy month, and I was doing NaNoWriMo and starting a new job, so I didn't probably read as much this month as I would usually. Only one contemporary novel this month, but it was a good one. I got this at the library, so I don't have a physical copy to show you, but I finally read Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. Now, Celeste Ng is one of those authors who I've heard a lot about on BookTube, but I've never been that interested in. So I read Everything I Never Told You for a book club at Octopus, which is where I used to work until a few weeks ago, and oh my goodness was it brilliant. I don't understand why I wasn't driven to pick it up sooner, because definitely will be in my favourite books of the year. I loved Everything I Never Told You so much, and I cannot wait to read Little Fires Everywhere. It was just brilliant. So Everything I Never Told You tells the story of a family and what happens when the teenage daughter Lydia disappears. It sounds like a thriller, but it's not really, although it is quite dramatic and exciting, and you do kind of get the kind of unravelling and working out of what happened, but it's more about how this kind of family operates both before and after Lydia's disappearance. Lydia has an elder brother, a younger sister, and her two parents. Her mother is white and her father is Chinese American, and this book is set, I think, in the 70s, so Lydia's parents being a mixed race couple, and Lydia and her family being half Chinese is a very big issue and something that means they feel in many ways quite ostracised and left out from the society that they are part of. And the book kind of explores what happens to the family without Lydia and how it operated before, and it's just brilliant. It's just so emotionally heartfelt and immaculately written. Like, I picked it up and within the first few pages I was like, oh, I'm really, really going to like this writer. Celeste Ng's writing style really, really reminds me of Emily St. John Mandel, who is possibly my favourite contemporary novelist. I can see so many similarities between their style of writing and just like the precision and the clarity of it, which is something I love. I thought Everything I Never Told You was so fantastic. Like, the writing style was so good. I know I'm gonna love Little Fires Everywhere as well, and like everything else she puts out, because it's just absolutely my kind of writing and just absolutely my kind of book. One that is very character and theme driven, very emotionally impactful, but also has like a really gripping plot at its heart. It's absolutely fantastic. Definitely my favourite read of this month, and one that I would highly, highly recommend. And next onto the non-fiction books that I read in the month of November for non-fiction November. I didn't get through as much as I was hoping to. My TBR for November was very ambitious considering everything else that was going on, but I did read 4.5 non-fiction books in November, which I'm pretty happy with. So the first one I picked up was The Guilty Feminist. I actually listened to this on audiobook, but I have a proof copy here as well. I enjoyed this quite a lot, though it wasn't precisely what I was expecting, I would say. This is a really interesting book by Deborah Frances White, who is a comedian and podcaster, and basically she looks at feminism from a variety of angles and looks at the kind of contradictions that sometimes exist within feminism or within life as being a feminist woman, and kind of what it can mean to both agree with feminism ideologically, but sometimes in your own behaviour not live up to those ideals and that ideology. I found that aspect of things really interesting, and there was a lot in this book that I absolutely loved. Especially I found her chapter on body image really, really interesting and impactful and really, really powerful, and a lot of the things she said I found myself like nodding along and really agreeing with. It's also a very inclusive book. She talks a lot about intersectional feminism and how to make feminism more intersectional, which I really, really enjoyed. There was only one thing that I kind of wish she had talked about a bit more, and that I was expecting her to talk about more, was the kind of difference and division between being a feminist on like an ideological level and being like a feminist activist. She didn't really address the people who are feminists and identify as feminists but aren't like part of the movement on like a social and kind of activist level. So I thought that was something I would have liked her to address a bit more, but I did in general find it a really interesting book, and it's one that I would recommend. Then I also read Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson, which I really enjoyed. This is my second Bill Bryson book, but it's my first of his travel writing books, which is obviously what he is most known for. And Notes on a Small Island is his look at the United Kingdom from the perspective of an American, and he goes around various places in Britain and talks a bit about what they're like. I found it quite weird actually reading Notes from a Small Island, because it's from the early to mid 90s, and actually that's quite a long time ago, and this country's changed quite a lot since then, so some of it felt very familiar and true to life to me, and some of it felt very much like reading a history book in some ways, so that was quite interesting. In general, I would say I enjoyed the bits where he talks about kind of culture and cultural differences, especially between the US and the UK, more interesting than some of the travel bits, but I think that's just kind of my personal taste, and in general I think in going through various works by Bill Bryson, I'm probably going to enjoy his history books more than his travel writing, just because in general I favour books about history rather than books about travel. But there were some things that I found really, really interesting, especially, like I said, in terms of his looking at the cultural differences between the UK and the US. Like there's a bit at the beginning of the book, Notes from a Small Island, where he just goes through a list of things he encountered in the UK that he'd never heard of before, which really surprised me. Like, I can't believe that in the US you don't have Christmas crackers. Like, how is it Christmas without Christmas crackers, guys? It makes me really sad. And also that you don't have L plates on cars that are learning how to drive. How do you know if a driver is a learner, or do you just not know? Like, it was really interesting to learn things about the US by looking at the things that Bill Bryson didn't understand or didn't know when he first came to the UK, so I found that really interesting. On to my two favourite non-fiction books of the month. These two are absolutely brilliant, two that I really, really loved, and also might make an appearance in my favourite books of the year video, though I feel like at this rate it's going to be very long. But anyway, both of these were, unsurprisingly perhaps, about the Victorian period. This is The Suspicions of Mr. Witcher by Kate Summerscale. I love this a lot, more than I was expecting in some ways. I knew that I would find it interesting, but I found it even more interesting and even more compelling than I thought I would, and I read it like really quite quickly and kind of turning through the pages. It was a really, really engaging, brilliant book. So this tells the story of, as the subtitle says, the murder of Road Hill House. So this is a murder that took place in the mid-Victorian period, where a small boy, sort of, I think about 3 years old, was killed, and suspicion immediately fell on various members of the household, servants, parents, siblings, and so on. And slowly this case kind of was unravelled and looked at by Mr. Witcher, a detective, over several years. And the book kind of follows the case, and through that looks a lot at this family that were living at Road Hill House, and also at kind of all Victorian families and Victorian life, and what Victorian life was like. I found it really, really compelling to read as a kind of true crime book. I don't think I've ever read any true crime before, and I would definitely like to read some true crime again in the future. Probably only historical true crime. I think I would find it more disturbing to read, and more contemporary true crime, but a true crime about something that happened in the Victorian period I think I would prefer and find more interesting as well. And I found this book really interesting in being a history book about the Victorian period, and the way that Kate Summerscale kind of uses this case study of this particular murder to explore a lot of different things about Victorian life, and a lot of the things that the Victorians didn't want to talk about, which especially is interesting for me as someone who, you know, a lot of my knowledge about the Victorians comes from reading Victorian literature where certain things aren't discussed. So I found this really, really interesting, and definitely a book I would recommend. I then also read this book by Lucy Worsley. This is Queen Victoria, Daughter, Wife, Mother, Widow. This book was absolutely incredible. I was very kindly sent a review copy of this by Hodder and Stoughton, who publish it, and I must say I absolutely loved this a lot. I read Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley earlier this year and loved that too, and I just think she is my perfect non-fiction writer in a way. Like, she writes non-fiction precisely in the way I like it, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading even more of her non-fiction in the future, because she is such a brilliant writer, and for me she has the perfect level of like detail and kind of zooming in and zooming out, and the perfect like narrative voice where sometimes she mentions her own feelings and her own like interpretation of things, but for the most part it is quite historical narrative. This is what happened. What I love about this biography of Queen Victoria, and one of the reasons why I think it's so well done, is that rather than taking a completely A to B zoomed out history of Victoria's life, focuses instead on 24 particular moments, particular days in Victoria's life, and it looks at sort of what led up to these days and how these particular days, these particular moments were sort of turning points in Queen Victoria's life. I really, really love that. I thought that was fantastically done, and just such a good idea of how to write a biography that means it's very compelling, and you get sort of these individual case studies of bits of Victoria's life which give you a very strong sense of her as a personality and the kind of figures and people around her, but also because there are 24 of them, you do get a good oversight of her life. I love this a lot, would definitely recommend. Really, really engaging, so easy to read and enjoyable, and if you're interested in the Victorians and in Queen Victoria, then this is definitely a book that I would recommend. Finally, there is one final non-fiction book. This is one I haven't finished. I'm about maybe a third of the way through. I've read some of it so far and I'm enjoying it, and that is Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. I'm actually listening to this on audiobook, but I'm enjoying it so far, and I'm hoping that I will finish it off in the month of December. So Silk Roads is a alternative history of the world, I suppose, which looks at the kind of centre and heart of early civilization, not as the Roman Empire but as the Persian Empire, and kind of explores the history of the world through that lens. I'm really enjoying it so far, finding it very interesting and looking forward to reading on. That is it. That is everything that I read in the month of November. Please let me know down in the comments if you took part in Non-Fiction November. Please let me know in general what you've been reading in November, and if you have read any of the books I spoke about and what you thought of them. But that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow with another Vlogmas video.